Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Happy Fossil Friday. So this is a collaborative effort between the Western Science Center and the Raymond M. Alf Museum to bring paleontology and people who study it to your living room. I'm Brittany Stoneberg. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Western Science Center in Hemet, California. We also have Gabriel Santos, who is the Collections Manager and Outreach Coordinator for the Raymond M. Alf Museum in Claremont. And today we are going to be hosting Tara Lepore, who is a graduate student at UC Berkeley and a paleontologist. And today she's going to be talking all about teeth. Welcome, Tara.
Thanks, Brittany. Thank you, Gabe. And hello, everyone. Happy Fossil Friday. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Today the topic, as you could tell from our title, is Tales Teeth Tell. And so as a paleontologist, I have studied a number of different topics over the years, and my current passion and interest is all about teeth. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and I have a little presentation for you. So I'm going to share my screen and then you'll get to see what I'm talking about. And like all stories, we're going to begin sort of at the beginning with a little bit about who I am and sort of my path to how I got to do what I'm doing now. So here I go, sharing the screen. Okay.
Perfect.
Great. So, what tales do teeth tell? The science unlocked by teeth. So, a little bit about me. So I put a bunch of pictures of myself up here, which is a little weird because, it's weird to see yourself in so many different ways. But I have, over the last 15 years or so, had a number of experiences in paleontology and science and education. But my path has also been a little bit roundabout. I didn't go straight from my undergraduate work into graduate work. I definitely worked for a while and took some time to figure out exactly what I wanted my path to look like. So I just want to advocate for anyone out there who's listening that that is completely okay and that you can follow your goals in a time that works for you. So you can see some pictures here. Um, can they see my cursor?
Yes.
Let's see. Perhaps not.
Okay, let me try one more type of sharing and just see. Okay, can you see my cursor now?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, sounds good.
To the chat.
Yeah, so this is just kind of a nice way for me to point things out, but if people have questions, I just want to say, please feel free. I can't see the chat box, but I think our hosts will go ahead and forward
Yeah.
them to me.
Yes, this is Brittany speaking. If you have any questions, I am monitoring the stream chat, so feel free to put those questions in, and we will try and get to as many of them as possible.
Great. Yeah, so these pictures just show a little bit of some of the jobs that I've had. The very official looking picture on the left-hand side is from my time as a high school teacher. I taught for 7 years in 3 different high schools, public and private. And so that's an extremely rewarding and oftentimes challenging career. So I very much am a fan of incorporating different ways of reaching broad audiences into my work. I've worked as a paleontological mitigation consultant, and what that means is I would go to construction sites and actually hang out around big moving equipments and equipment and caterpillars that would be digging for different construction projects, and I would be in charge of looking for fossils there. I've also done field work, and I'm also a really big advocate for women in paleontology. So over the past few years, that has been a real goal of mine, is to help young women, girls, and female identifying um, people, students, really get a sense of how to enter science fields. And my latest adventure has been at the University of California at Berkeley, and where at Cal, as we call it, I've been working on developing my research on teeth. So, some of what you'll hear me talk about today is in the very early stages of actually exploring research. But this talk will be an overview of the kinds of things that you would need to know if you just want a baseline knowledge of what teeth can tell us and just what goes into making up a tooth. And I also went ahead and put some pictures here of a microscope and a thin section of a tooth. Well, it's actually a pretty thick section. And that little block you can see in the microscope on the left-hand side, that's what it looks like. This is a sliced through tooth, molar tooth of an animal called Leptomyrix. And Leptomyrix is an extinct animal, a herbivore, so it ate plants. And you can see the crown has this, or the top of the tooth has these three ridges, almost like a mountain chain. And so we'll delve into that as well today, thinking about what teeth look like. I also want to mention my partner Jessica, who lives with me here in Berkeley, and on the right-hand side, a recent project that I have been working on with my sister Katrina, who is a special needs adult, and she lives in Boston, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And so, again, coming back to education, she and I were working, and also Gabe Santos, who is one of our co-hosts, we're working on developing education and outreach for special needs adults. So back to teeth. Let's think about what teeth look like. So teeth really are kind of like layer cakes. If you were to take a slice of a tooth, kind of like the picture I showed you, the leptomyrix, only this here is the human tooth, a cartoon of a human tooth on the left-hand side. Teeth have different layers. And the very top layer, the layer that you could touch right now with your tongue, if you were to touch the teeth in your mouth, and take a second and do that, I'm going to sound really funny. But that top layer is enamel. And that's kind of like the really tough frosting, if you will, on top of the cake. And enamel we'll talk about in more detail later on. But if you look on the right-hand side, you can see this dark brownish color, and that dark brownish layer is enamel. So if you were to take a thin section of a human tooth or a tooth that has enamel, you'd see this kind of layer. And then directly beneath that, you'll see another layer. This is kind of like the spongy cake, sort of, except it's also very tough. And it's a material called dentin, or sometimes spelled dentine with an E on the end. So I'll use those terms interchangeably, dentin and dentine. And dentin is actually what ivory is made out of, if you guys know about the ivory of elephant tusks. So our dentin is just beneath our enamel. And if you look at the picture on the right, you can see some white material on the bottom of this right-hand side picture, and that is dentin or dentine. And we also have pulp, which is the kind of living core of the tooth where a lot of blood vessels are. And, oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Pay no attention to that. And we also have something called cementum. And cementum isn't really on this diagram with a label, but cementum kind of holds the layers together. It also helps to cement the tooth into the root. Okay. So, how are teeth formed? Many of you may have wondered this, how did teeth kind of come to be? Well, they're not bones like the rest of our skeleton are bones. They're made of similar materials. But if you were to take little slices through the tissue that grows in our mouth as teeth are forming in an embryo, you would see different stages. So it goes, this diagram on the left goes from left to right, kind of in like a semicircle. So the earliest stage is the placoid stage, and you don't have to worry about all of these different names, but I want you to pay attention to something that is labeled EP. This is epithelium, it's a type of tissue, and MES, that is mesenchyme. It's another type of tissue. So in this early stage, these two tissues kind of mesh together, and both of those two tissues help signal chemically the different stages of tooth development. So don't worry about the rest of the SR, DM labels. If you have questions about them, I'm happy to answer them later. But just know that as teeth develop, around 11 weeks in humans, 11 weeks of development embryologically, you start to see these stages progress. So the bud, the cap, the late bell, and by this late bell stage, you'll start to see what almost begins to look like a tooth. So you have an enamel layer, dentin or dentine, and these funny things. So if you go over to the zoomed in picture on the right-hand side, you can see what is essentially a snapshot or an enlarged version of one of these late bell stage teeth. It's called the maturation stage. Whoops, go back. And so I just want to point out that the two types of cells that actually grow enamel and dentin or dentine are ameloblasts, which grow enamel, and odontoblasts, which grow dentin or dentine. So throughout the process of enamel and dentin or dentine growing and being produced, we have these specialized cells that come from the epithelium and the mesenchyme interactions. And it's really interesting that these cells continue to work as long as the tooth is growing. And something that's really interesting to me as a scientist is there are some animals that don't, they never stop having active ameloblasts or odontoblasts. So some animals have teeth that grow throughout their lives. And so, what is it about those organisms, those animals, that can allow us to look at these tooth signals that I'll talk about shortly throughout their lives? So that's a little bit about how teeth are formed. Now, what do teeth look like in the jaws? This is probably something a little more familiar to some of us. We can look at our mouth and we can feel the different types of teeth in our mouth. And there are two main terms I'd like us all to kind of just have in the back of our heads. So one is homodont, homo meaning the same, and homodont, same teeth. So they have the same basic shape of teeth in the jaw. So if you look at the image on the left-hand side, you can see some examples of fish that have homodont teeth, like the catfish and the gar. You can also see some reptiles that have homodont teeth, like a python. And, well, iguana, the jury is out. I think iguana has some interesting shaped teeth. But I just want to point out that just because something's a reptile doesn't mean that it has homodont teeth. We tend to think of this idea of the same shape of a tooth almost being a reptilian or fish or amphibian characteristic, but it's a little more complicated than all that. The second term here is heterodont, hetero meaning different, and dont or odont meaning tooth. So the different shapes of teeth within the jaw. So just like our own mouth, we can run our tongue along the teeth in our mouth and we can see, oh, I have some pointy teeth. Those would be our canines. Okay, I have some shovel shaped teeth up in the front. Those are our incisors. And in the back, I have these flatter teeth. We have flatter teeth that are premolars and molars. So on the right-hand side, you can see examples side by side of a carnivore and a herbivore and how they have, at least on the carnivore side, you can see incisors, sharp canines. This is a view from as if the animal were chomping down on us. So we're looking up at the roof of the mouth. Canines, premolars, and molars, and you can see the very different shapes of the molars and premolars in the herbivore. So, where do teeth come from? So there's a lot to be said about where teeth come from and how teeth evolved, but I'll go ahead and just give you a very basic overview that there are two main hypotheses. One hypothesis is that if you look at the very bottom here, this B part of the diagram, that there were teeth that may have come from the gills of ancient fish, because there are some structures in the gills of fish, and especially ancient fish fossils, that look a little bit like teeth. Okay, that's hypothesis one. Hypothesis two is up at the top, this A part of the diagram. And that's the idea that if you look at some of the skin of different fish, especially fish like sharks, if you were to run your hand along the surface of shark's skin, you'd notice it kind of feels like sandpaper. And if you were to take that skin and look at it under the microscope, you'd actually see what look like little shark teeth. So that's part of a really big body of evidence that is really trying to get to the bottom of, did teeth go from outside in, from the skin outside into the mouth, sort of enveloping the mouth cavity and becoming these bigger, sharper teeth? Or did teeth come from inside out? Did they come from inside in these gill kind of objects, and the skin was just a secondary tooth-like thing that might not have been related? So, question for all of you. There's a lot there to unpack. I personally lean towards the outside in, but you don't have to take my word for it. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. So I'm very interested in the tales that teeth can tell us. So in order to do that, I want to just introduce you to some of the shapes and forms of teeth in mammals. So mammals like us, they feed their young on milk and generally have hair. Um, so we are mammals, and we have a diversity of teeth. And mammal teeth are really, really excellent when we find them in the fossil record, because number one, they preserve really well. All teeth really do preserve very well. But they also can be diagnostic. And by that, I mean you can look at a single mammal tooth and have a really good idea of what kind of mammal it came from because of the specialized shapes of mammal teeth. But something that interests me is, when do reptiles also have those interesting shapes and what we would call cusps, those kind of mountains and peaks and valleys? And at what point did we have a transition from reptiles to mammals? So if you look at this diagram, we've got a chimpanzee kind of smiling, and we have a fossil animal called Didelphodon from the Cretaceous at the very bottom left. Have some interesting examples of different mammal skulls and especially teeth. Look at the walrus here, very, very interesting. And some mammals that don't have any teeth. So that's interesting as well. I also want to point out on the right-hand side, this thing here looks like a tree that's been sliced in half. This is actually a slice through elephant tusk. So it has rings within it that are indicative of the growth of that animal. So very, very cool. Once again, this is a dentin or dentine material. And I really love this little taxidermy deer on the bottom. And this is real. This is not just made up. These are fangs that are extended canine teeth, just like our own sharp, pointy canines. And this is an animal called the Chinese water deer. So I put this picture in just to give you guys a sense of the fact that even herbivorous or plant-eating animals can have some very strange teeth, and they may use them for different reasons other than hunting or pursuing prey or digging into their prey. These Chinese water deer are alive today, and they actually use these teeth for display, male-to-male combat and display. Okay, so let's think about reptiles. So there are lots of different fascinating reptiles. I just put a few pictures in here because reptiles, if you look at the crocodile on the left-hand side, that crocodile has what we would call homodont teeth. They might be a little different in size, but they're pretty much the same shape. Okay, that's cool and interesting. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is the skull of a tegu, Tegu, and this is a reptile that's alive today. And if you look closely, you can see the front of the mouth has these pointy teeth. And if you look towards the back, it has these kind of little lumpy shaped teeth. So it's the tegu is very interesting. Tegu generally eat meat, but they have these very strange bumpy teeth that you might almost think would look like they almost look like molars. So it's very interesting to me as a scientist. When do we see animals that kind of run against expectations? And that really gets me curious and thinking about well, what does the structure of the tooth look like on the inside that might actually help us answer some questions? And the animal in the middle. The animal in the middle, this kind of artist's reconstruction, is a very strange, extinct reptilian creature. It's called a Lystrosaurus. Lystrosaurus is thought to have been a herbivore. It lived at the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, but it was not a dinosaur. It's actually a little more closely related to mammals. So it's been reconstructed with a bunch of hair, kind of like a weird, naked, pig like thing. And it has these tusks that are very, very strange. So, what was it using those tusks for? Why does it have tusks? You know, we don't really see reptiles today that look like this. So, that's another very interesting question. So briefly, we can look even closer at teeth, and these are slices or surface images of different kinds of teeth. If you have questions about the different kinds of teeth, I'm happy to look them up further. I've got a list of them. But suffice it to say that these are examples from mammals and reptiles, and they show different surfaces that look very different. So one of the key things here is when we look at enamel, that very top layer of our teeth, or the top layer of a lot of animal teeth, when do we see a certain shape or pattern in enamel? And does that shape or pattern in enamel allow us to say something about the diet of an animal, even if it's an extinct animal? So looking at the way that enamel appears, or the way it's constructed, enamel can have these very strong prisms in them. And if you have prismatic enamel, enamel that has prisms, which generally mammals have, then you tend to have really a tough chewing surface, which is great if you, like many mammals, only have two sets of teeth throughout your entire life, which makes sense, right? We all lose our baby teeth and then we grow our adult teeth. Most mammals do that, although there are exceptions. And there are also exceptions in reptiles, where some reptiles don't grow their teeth throughout their entire lives and, you know, continuously replace them. So where do you see these dividing lines between the different types of enamel, these prismatic prism shapes, and the prismless uh, sort of examples? And then just to throw a wrench into things even further, there are examples of teeth that have no enamel at all. So kind of like the tusks that we saw earlier, and there are other examples of dentine-only teeth. So very strange. Why does this happen? When do we see these patterns? And this is sort of the last toothy tale, but it's an important one. It's all about the chemistry. So if we were to take a look at the ways that we can chemically analyze teeth, there are three main elements. There are more, but I'm just going to focus on these three that we can actually sample little ground up piece of tooth. So it doesn't destroy the whole tooth, nothing but the tooth. So carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen are three of the main ways that chemistry can help us unlock some of these toothy tales. And the main takeaway points that I want you guys to think about here is carbon. Carbon helps us reconstruct the dietary preferences of these animals and allows us to look at paleoecology. So can we take a look at the carbon ratios of a tooth and figure out if an animal was a grazer that ate a lot of grass, or a browser, maybe it ate a lot of leaves and other tougher things? So what's going on here? Oxygen is, when we look at oxygen ratios, we can actually help reconstruct seasonal dietary changes. It actually looks at the body water that the animal was drinking or taking in through food. So through the oxygen that we see in teeth, these ratios, we can take a look at seasonal dietary changes. We can also say something about precipitation and environmental humidity. And nitrogen. So nitrogen is very interesting because the amount of nitrogen in teeth can potentially help us reconstruct trophic levels. And what that means, a trophic level is a level in a food web. So was an animal more likely to be carnivore, herbivore, something else within the food web? And there are other questions that these three main isotopes, and by isotope, I mean it's a type of atom that has a different number of neutrons, so it's a little heavier, but we're not going to get too much into chemistry. But are there other questions that these three main isotopes or chemical signals can tell us? So that's something that really interests me. So taking all of these together, we can actually put together a really nice body of evidence for what we believe teeth were doing or what the animals were doing that had these teeth. When we look at the chemistry, when we look at the shape and the type of enamel, and when we look at the overall shape and type of the teeth in the mouth, as well as the jaw and the skull as a whole. So where do we go from here? So as a PhD student, I'm just beginning this line of research. So I put this slide in through the Understanding Science website at UC Berkeley. It's a great resource for thinking about how science works and how the entire process starts. Really, I became interested in this line of work through being curious and just having questions about teeth. I started thinking about these kinds of questions and talking with my advisor and just talking with other people and thinking about what kinds of things I could ask that maybe hadn't been asked before, or looking at the questions other people have asked by reading some of the literature that's been written about teeth and thinking about, oh, well, that's really interesting. I wonder what else could be done with this technique, or I wonder maybe how could we take a look at some of the questions that have been asked and move them a little further. So I put this slide in because right now it's all about finding inspiration, and it's all about making observations and really sharing ideas. And along with that really goes exploring the literature and looking at what has already been done in terms of research. And I like that this little diagram also says serendipity, because there's a little bit of luck involved in terms of what you happen to read or what you happen to come across in your search, or even who you happen to know. So as scientists, it's really important to maintain communication with each other and collaborate. And I think that's one of the most exciting and rewarding and compassionate parts of science, is that we really can do more together than we can alone. So that's all I have to say about teeth. I actually could talk a lot more, but that's where I would love for you guys to open up some questions. You're welcome to ask me about what I do in the day-to-day, how I got here as a scientist, what's my favorite color, my favorite food. And also, if you have any questions about teeth, I want to make sure that I thank the Alf Museum and the Western Science Center for inviting me, my friends Gabe and Brittany, and the entire staff and research crew at those wonderful institutions. I have a lot of image sources. And if you want to contact me, they will share out my various social media usernames, but you're also welcome to email me at tlepore@berkeley.edu. And thank you guys so much for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
Alrighty. So this is Brittany speaking. So looks like, looking at the chat, we already have a question or two. And again, guys, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. It takes about 15-second delay, but we will see it. This question is from Maya. She asks, what is the most unexpected thing you can find out from teeth?
Hi, Maya. So that's a great question. One of the most unexpected things that we can determine from teeth is actually something I was just reading about the other day. And it's something that I don't have a full answer for. So I think it's something unexpected. So bear with me here. What I was reading about is how nitrogen, and looking at this chemistry of nitrogen in teeth, might be able to allow us to look at not just the where in the food web an animal is it a predator, is it prey, what's going on, but also it might be able to tell us something about when or if an animal was drinking milk and had sort of an enrichment in their teeth, because just like we drink milk for the calcium and other nutrients, animals that drink milk tend to have a signature in their teeth that allow us to look at whether that animal was, drinking milk as a baby and then stopped drinking milk. So there are other chemical signatures like barium that can also, barium's another chemical that, or another element that can allow us to look at that. But with nitrogen, something that really interests me is, can we go back and look at the fossil record and try to figure out whether or not some of the earliest reptiles that were very closely related to mammals, whether they drank milk based on the signatures in their teeth. So I guess that's a little bit of, it would be surprising if I found that kind of an answer, but it's very interesting to me right now. And because I'm still working on my studies, I think that's the direction that I might want to go.
Awesome.
Hey
Good
Tara,
question, Maya.
Yeah.
would you mind turning off your share screen really quick?
Oh yes. Okay,
Thank
go
you.
ahead and do that.
Yes, hello again. Good question, Maya. Another question from Ashley Paul. Hi, Ashley. Did you get into a PhD program first, or did you choose this PhD program because you wanted to study teeth? I think that's a good question because I think people don't always understand like what the motivation is between, for picking a particular PhD program.
Yeah, hi Ashley, and that's a great question. So early on in the talk, I kind of glossed over some of the jobs that I've done in the past, but I got into this PhD program because throughout the process of my career and my different jobs, I decided, I went from, coming straight out of undergrad and saying, I'm kind of burnt out. I did a big research project. I don't know if a PhD is for me. Some of the things I heard were, I don't know, maybe going into a PhD program will be really hard and I won't fit in. And so as I continued along in my career, I started to get to know a lot of people, including people who are here, and who are hosting this chat, who really helped me think about research in a different way and helped me think about, I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to think that this isn't for me, and I can just be myself. And so that gave me the confidence to start looking at PhD programs. But I also really feel like my time as a teacher really helped me think about, why would I want to pursue a PhD? Because I definitely don't need one. But for me, it became a question of, what can I do with this kind of training? And so as a PhD student, I get a certain amount of training, not just in science and how to be a biologist, but also in outreach and education, that for me really took what I was already doing and allowed me to apply it in a way that I maybe hadn't gotten full training in before, which for me looked like, okay, how do I take my own research project from beginning to end and really see it to completion, which people can do with or without a degree. But I think for me, talking with the right advisor and getting a sense of the right program was like, that was the kicker. If I was going to leave my time as an educator, as a teacher, I wanted it to be for the right reasons, and everything just kind of clicked for this particular program. Yeah, great question. I want to really emphasize that there's no one way to do it. There's no one degree you have to have. It just depends on kind of what your career goals are, and maybe in that case, if you need a PhD for a certain professor job or something like that, then you might want to look ahead and think about a degree. But yeah, hope that helps.
So on our stream, we've got questions too from Evan Johnson Ransom. He's asking, how would you describe the teeth morphology in snakes?
Oh, hi, Evan. Yeah, that's a really great question. So a few weeks ago, before everything kind of locked down and we weren't allowed to go different places, I was able to go on a field trip with a class that actually goes out and looks for herpetology specimens. And so herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians, if you guys didn't know. And so I really became interested in snake teeth, just walking around and thinking about like, oh, wow, I'm going to flip over this log. Maybe I'll find a snake. Will it be a rattlesnake? I hope it doesn't bite me. And as I was kind of like flipping these logs and walking with students and talking with the professors, I started thinking about snake teeth. And so snake teeth, I would consider them homodont teeth because they tend to have that same kind of shape or morphology. But they also have fangs. A lot of snakes have fangs. And so that's very interesting to me because I'm super curious about whether, two things, whether you can make some kind of generalized statement about how snake teeth have become hyper enlarged to become fangs, like you see in other organisms that have canines or caniniform teeth. And then the other thing is, can you see anything in the soft palate or anything at all in the jaw mechanism that would indicate whether an organism is venomous? Now, sometimes you can see that with hollowed teeth, but a lot of the kind of what's called the Jacobson's organ and other parts of the sensory apparatus of snakes is in the soft tissue. So whether it's venom or their sensory capabilities, can you see anything in the skull that would indicate the kind of organ that they have or the kind of venom capability? So that's kind of a long-winded answer to say homodont teeth, but also snakes are really cool. And I think that I'd love to learn more about them. Oh yeah, yeah. Ooh, Sam, that's a great question. So, oh man, the rarest or hardest to find. Let me think about that. The rarest or hardest to find. Well, I can tell you what isn't hard to find. It's the animals' teeth where the animals lose their teeth all the time. So like shark teeth and a lot of reptile teeth, you tend to find just boatloads of those. I would say I would probably, just thinking out loud, say that a rare tooth would be from an animal that doesn't have very many teeth and maybe doesn't lose them very often. So the only thing I can think of is like Oviraptor because it's got that one little kind of nubbin of a tooth-like thing. So that's a great question, Sam. I'm gonna have to think about that more.
Thanks, Tara. Sorry if you couldn't hear me on the last round. There's actually a helicopter flying around my house right now, so
Oh,
I muted my I muted my mic for a second.
it's
This
fine.
one is from Mr. Rob Soto, and he's asking, are tusks teeth? And also, what is your favorite tooth that you have studied?
Yeah, hi Rob. So I'll start with the favorite tooth. Um, well, again, because I'm still trying to figure out what I'm studying, I can't really say like the favorite one that I've studied because I'm just at that beginning stage, my first year of my PhD, and I'm transitioning from what I used to study, which was, by the way, fossil poop. So yeah, which I'm just going all the way through the organism from from end to beginning, from back end to front end. But I will say that one of my most super interesting teeth, just in general, are tusks. And so I'm really glad that you asked about tusks. Tusks of all kinds, whether it's the tusk that was in the Chinese water deer tusks, or kind of the enlarged teeth in walruses, tusks in mammoths and mastodons and elephants. Yeah. So your question about what are tusks? So tusks, it kind of depends on how you define a tusk. Do you call a walrus's teeth tusks? Generally, people do. Walrus tusks are canines, and versus elephants and what we call proboscideans, that whole group, those are, I think the most recent research says incisor. Um, Although I was talking to someone in my lab and we were kind of going back and forth, they're like, are they really incisors? So I don't know, maybe someone else who knows more about elephant tusks can chime in. Um, and so it also depends on which organism you're looking at, because you can have tusks that have only dentine, and you can have tusks that have enamel, and you can have tusks that are big lumpy things that are kind of spherical or cylindrical, or you can have tusks that are flattened. Do you call the fangs of a saber-toothed cat tusks? I don't know. I would probably call them more like enlarged canines. But there's kind of a gradient where the people who study teeth try to think about the terminology and whether we're talking about a fang or an enlarged canine or a tusk. So I hope that helps. It kind of depends on what you're looking at.
On the Western Science Center stream, we have another question. D. Garcia asks, are you doing microware studies? And if you are you doing them on particular animals?
Yeah, thanks, Dee. So yeah, I actually left microware out of this study or out of the talk, because it's not something that I'm focused on right now. But in terms of so for those of us who don't know what microware is, if you also look at the surface of a tooth, it's this big. If you look at the surface of a tooth under a microscope, you can look at various features, pits, scratches, gouges, and things like that, and try to make some kind of estimation of what kind of diet or what kind of abrasive material was scraping against the teeth. And so that can be another piece of evidence that helps us look at potential diet of different extinct and living animals. But I haven't done microware. I'm glad you brought it up, because it was kind of like the missing piece. But because it's not my main focus, we'll see. It would be interesting to try and apply that potentially in the future.
Cool. And then let's see, Maddie Verbeek has asked, have you been able to continue your work during this time? Has that impacted you in any way?
Oh yeah, Maddie, thank you so much for asking that. So I think a lot of us are kind of impacted in terms of getting into the lab, and I'm sure all of us are impacted in different ways. Because right now I don't have an active like tooth slicing kind of research schedule, I feel really lucky in that I'm not necessarily impacted in that way. I like collecting data, but it's a little hard to not have that routine of going in and seeing your lab friends and colleagues face to face. And I think I feel really like grateful that I can do a lot of reading and kind of that exploratory phase of my work from home right now. But I know a lot of people who are also working, like maybe I'm in my first year of my PhD, maybe in the fourth or fifth year, they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to finish. I've got to try to, figure out all of my data. So there are definitely people who are being impacted. And it's, like I say, in just different ways. Yeah, but thank you so much for asking that.
Cool. So on our end, I've got a question from Diana L. Pomeroy. She's asking, what's the most interesting set of teeth you have ever studied?
Oh, hey, Diana. Yeah, so I guess at this point, I'm gonna have to think about the literature that I've read, because I'm still getting into like what I'm studying. But I really, really like, besides tusks, I know I kind of like sang their praises. I really just love the teeth of some of the what we would call stem mammals, or sometimes they're called basal synapsids. So think about think about animals like Dimetrodon and other kind of various related groups of organisms that were living in the Permian period to Triassic period that kind of have this, they're all related in varying ways to the earliest mammals, but they have very reptilian characteristics. So I think those guys are very interesting because they allow us to look at the closest ancient relatives of mammals and really try to tease apart what their teeth were doing before mammals truly came into their own evolutionarily, and also to try and figure out like what kinds of tooth morphology or shape they had, what are some of the chemical signatures that they had. So I'm really hoping to get more into that. Also, my advisor works on a lot of primate teeth, and so I've sort of been won over to like the exciting world of monkey teeth. So we'll see. I think monkeys might also be kind of on the docket to study.
This one's fun. This is a cross between your worlds. Have you ever found a fossil tooth in a coprolite? And if you have, could you identify the animal it came from?
Ooh, great question. Yeah, so I haven't personally found a tooth in a coprolite, but there have been a couple of studies I can think of that have you can see teeth really well when they're in something, or even just when you find a tooth, because that enamel coating is very shiny. So fragmentary teeth within coprolites are known, but I haven't personally found them. I found a lot of other cool things in coprolites. I wonder, and I want to kind of bounce this out to everyone. If you were to find teeth in a coprolite, what does that mean? Is that like a tooth that just kind of got glommed onto the fresh poop, or is it something that got ingested? So I think it depends a lot on the geology of what you're looking at. I think it depends on, can you look at the tooth and see if there's any evidence of acid etching or wear, like as it was going through a digestive system. So yeah, it's a really cool question. I love poop.
This one is from Emmy Moore. How can you describe teeth morphology in invertebrates?
Ooh, hi Emmy, great question. So I haven't delved too much into the world of invertebrate like literature about the science behind them, but invertebrates, they don't have jaws like we do. So if they have teeth or teeth-like things, they tend to have them in really strange and interesting ways. They'll have like little tooth-like plates. There's something called radula is one of the terms that comes to mind. It's sort of like a scraping sort of thing that different invertebrates will have, different mollusks in particular. What is this? No. So sorry, I'm getting a lot of like pop-ups on my screen. And so even if organisms don't have teeth in the same like enamel structure, it's really, really cool to think about invertebrates having the same kind of methodology of trying to procure food, even if they don't have like bony jaws. I also really think about things like leeches, where they're very soft and squishy, but they still have these like, they almost have like three different, it's almost like a science fiction thing, where three different kind of pincer looking things that they'll use to latch on to whatever they're drinking blood from. So even if invertebrates, again, they just don't have teeth like we do, they have tooth-like things, which are super cool.
Cool. So we have one more question from the Western Science Center stream. Thank you guys for all of your questions. I think these are all really awesome and well-informed. Leigh Crawford, her son just wants to know if you've worked with megalodon fossils.
Oh, yeah, that's really a great question. I haven't, although I have gone out to collect shark fossils for a museum that I actually volunteered at while I was teaching high school in Houston. I used to live in Houston, Texas. And so those weren't megalodon fossils, but they were shark teeth fossils. And it was so fun to just go and like crack open rocks and be like, is there a shark tooth? There's a shark tooth. It was just really fun. So not megalodon, but I think shark teeth can be really, really fascinating and really fun to find.
On the
Thank
Alf
you
Museum
all.
side,
Mm-hmm.
Filippo Bertoza asks, what do you think about the tusk-like teeth in Heterodontosaurus?
Ooh, Filippo, hey, how are you? Um, yeah, so there's actually a cast, like a replica of Heterodontosaurus in one of the glass cases in the science building where I work. Oh, I miss you, science building. But I walk past it a lot, and I kind of have time to pause and think about, okay, Heterodontosaurus. The name itself means Heterodontosaurus. It means different toothed reptile. And if you look at the skull, for those of us listening who don't know what the skull looks like, it looks like a little, herbivorous plant-eating dinosaur walking around on two legs. But it's got these little fangs in the bottom and the top, these like caniniform teeth. So what do I think about them? I think they're really interesting. I think it's fascinating that, with the exception of Heterodontosaurus and maybe some other dinosaurs that have strange tooth morphologies like Masiakasaurus, you don't see saber-toothed dinosaurs. And why is it that saber teeth or enlarged caniniform teeth seem to be, with a few exceptions, really like Heterodontosaurus, in the synapsid line, so in early reptile-like synapsids, and then in mammals. And then the Mesozoic is this gap, um, for lack of a better phrase. So yeah, I think about Heterodontosaurus a lot. Um, you know, gotta, just put it under my pillow and think about some more ideas.
I actually don't even know what those are right now, so I'm gonna look those up later.
They're
Uh,
really cool. I would love to have one as a pet, honestly.
Here's a question from Kristen Karan. In venomous animals, are the venom sacs in the teeth or the jaw or both? Does it vary between animal species?
Yeah, Kristen, great question. So I'm not an expert on venomous animals, but from what I know, if you look at the various types of animals that have venom, like snakes, certain snakes will have venom in the front fangs. Other animals that are venomous, or at least have a very caustic or dangerous bite, like Komodo dragons, they will have kind of like a bacterial stew in their mouth that actually is, I think, on all of their teeth. So it just depends on what you call venom and what you think of as like the danger of the bite. Um, so whether something has like a canal through the teeth or not, I really think it depends. But I'm trying to think of other animals that have venom in their teeth. Um, yeah, it's a great question. More research. I'm gonna write it, look it up, and write it down. Got my pen right here.
It looks like you're getting research questions on the fly now.
Absolutely, and that's part of it too. I mean, literally anyone can do science, and anyone can really contribute. So when I mentioned earlier about collaboration and talking with people, it's not just talking with people, back and forth in a science building, doing a PhD program. It can be anyone. So I really love these questions. Thank you.
Speaking of PhD program, this question's from Lisa Agabian. Did you go straight to your PhD program after undergrad, skipping a master's, and do you recommend that route?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I went through a series of working blocks of time where I was in between being in school or being in school and working. So just to give you like the short 500-foot view, did my undergrad, then I graduated. I did a biology degree, and then I graduated, and I worked in actually a pharmaceutical lab for 3.5 years. And then I saved up a little money, and then I moved out to Colorado where I did my master's, and finished my master's in museum and field studies in 2012. And then after that, I said, I could do more school or a PhD or whatever, but I don't know if I'm really ready or what would I do with it. So I went, and I actually was really passionate about teaching. So I was a substitute teacher during my master's program. And I went and so I became certified as a teacher, and I taught in public school and private school as a high school science teacher for 7 years. And during that time, towards the end of that time, I was very fortunate to be involved in a second master's, which is, not very common, but it was in science education. So I was very interested in, thankfully with the school I was at, it was the perfect place for that. And from that program and that experience as a teacher, then I felt ready to jump into my PhD program. So it's been since the time I graduated college to now, 14 years. So it really, there really is no one right way to do it. I do recommend taking some time off if you're an undergrad, just to get a sense of what you want to do in the world. But again, there are plenty of people who go straight into graduate programs and do just fine. Everyone's experience is a little different, and there's really no wrong way.
Okay, so we have time for one last question, and this last question comes from Leah Collins. Hi, Leah. Leah's our lab manager at the Western Science Center. She says that her daughter was not able to go to Gabriel Santos's lecture about desmostilians, so she would like to know a little bit about desmostilian teeth, and specifically, she referred to them as the sushi roll teeth.
Hey, Leah, and hi, also your whole family. So I actually want to defer this one to Gabe because he's the expert on desmostilian teeth, but I would very much agree. They do look like a block of sushi rolls. Very delicious. So I think they're very strange and interesting looking. I don't know much about them other than Gabe's study that looked at a really old desmostilian and how those teeth were kind of worn down or missing.
Yeah, my my first publication was on how we found a specimen of desmostilian that didn't have teeth, so that was quite funny. But not to take away from Tara, but really quick, desmostilians, as we call them, they have some of the thickest enamel in teeth in mammals, and yeah, they look like sushi rolls. But instead of going off, maybe down the line I can give another talk on desmostilian teeth. Does that sound better?
Yeah, so stay tuned. We'll eventually we'll talk more about some desmostilians.
Yeah, it's a great question though.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, I believe that is all of the questions that we had. So I just want to extend a special thank you to Tara for agreeing to do this. We know it's uncertain times and that usually we would do this kind of thing in a lecture hall, but I think it's really good that we're able to come together virtually and unite our two museums to bring science to everybody else who is also at home right now.
Yeah, I'm really. Oh yeah, my pleasure. Really happy to do it. Thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you for all the great questions. I think it's really important to just have an open dialogue about science and the fact that scientists are just regular people doing some fun stuff. So yeah, if anyone thinks of any other questions, feel free to contact me. I'm sure that there will be some kind of blast with my social stuff and my email, of course.
Absolutely. And this will be, we are planning on this being a weekly broadcast. So you will see us again next week with another paleontologist for Fossil Friday. Both of our museums, the Western Science Center and the Raymond M. Alf Museum, are putting together lots of virtual programming for people who want to learn about science but are not currently able to go to a museum right now. So we will be doing these virtual chats. The Western Science Center is actually putting our Science Saturday event online with an at-home take-home kit, so we'll be releasing that on April 4th. And the Raymond M. Alf Museum is doing virtual field trips and a lot of other good stuff. So if you guys are looking for resources for yourself, your children, anybody else you might know who might be interested in paleontology and science in general, we will do our best to bring the museum to you. And again, we do have ways that you can support either of our museums if you are so inclined. So thank you to Tara and thank you to Gabe for helping us put this together.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.